In the heart of rural Ohio, there was a man who lived a quiet and simple life. His name was Jack, and he spent most of his days on a farm that had been in his family for over 100 years. It wasn't just any piece of land. It was a place, filled with memories, stories, and hard work from 3 generations. Every morning, Jack woke up to the sound of roosters crowing and the fresh smell of dewy grass. The field stretched out as far as the eye could see, golden with wheat during harvest season or green with crops ready to grow. For Jack, this farm wasn't just dirt and plants. It was home. Jack's wife used to tease him about how much he loved the farm. She'd say, "You're going to leave this world with mud stuck under your nails." But she always said it with a smile because she knew how much it meant to him. Together, they raised their kids there, teaching them the value of patience, perseverance, and working with their hands. Even after the children grew up and moved away, Jack stayed behind, tending to the land like it was an old friend who needed care. Life on the farm wasn't easy. There were long hours, unpredictable weather, and challenges that came with every planting season. But despite all that, Jack found joy in watching seeds turn into tall stalks of corn or rows of soybeans swaying gently in the breeze. Each harvest felt like a victory, a reminder that no matter how tough things got, he could rely on the land to provide. But one day, everything changed. A letter arrived at Jack's doorstep, breaking the peaceful rhythm of his life. It was official looking with a stamp from the state government. As soon as Jack opened it, his heart sank. The letter explained something called eminent domain, which meant the government wanted to take part of his land to build a highway. They said it was necessary for progress, for connecting cities and making travel easier. But to Jack, it felt like someone was tearing apart his soul. At first, Jack refused to believe it. How could anyone think a road was more important than his family's legacy? He decided to fight back. He hired lawyers, attended town hall meetings, and even spoke to reporters about how unfair it all seemed. He argued that the money they offered wasn't enough, not nearly close to what the land was truly worth. But deep down, Jack knew the odds were against him. The government had the power to take the land if they really wanted to, and no amount of fighting seemed to change that. As the months went by, reality started sinking in. Bulldozers began appearing near the edges of his property, marking where the construction would start. Jack tried to stay strong, but he couldn't help feeling defeated. One evening, sitting alone on the porch, he looked out at the fields he'd spent his entire life nurturing. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized he might never see them again. Finally, with a heavy heart, Jack accepted the compensation check. It wasn't what he hoped for, but it was better than nothing. Packing up his belongings, he left the only home he'd ever known and moved to a small house in the nearby city. Leaving the farm behind felt like saying goodbye to a part of himself. Every time he drove past the site and saw the bulldozers tearing through the fields, anger and sadness bubbled inside him. Little did Jack know, this painful chapter in his life was just the beginning of a story that would take unexpected turns. What seemed like the end of his world would eventually lead to opportunities he couldn't have imagined. But for now, Jack carried the weight of loss, unsure of what the future held. Months passed since Jack had left the farm, and life in the city was a stark contrast to the peaceful rhythm he'd grown accustomed to. The constant noise of traffic, the crowded streets, and the impersonal nature of urban living weighed heavily on him. He missed the open skies, the smell of fresh earth after rain, and the comforting familiarity of his fields. Whenever he drove past the highway that now cut through his old land, a pang of sadness hit him hard. It was like seeing an old friend reduced to rubble. One evening, while running errands at a local grocery store, Jack bumped into someone who would soon change the course of his life. The man introduced himself as Ethan, a real estate developer, whose name often appeared in newspapers and headlines. Jack recognized him instantly. Ethan was known for transforming abandoned properties into profitable ventures, earning both admiration and criticism from the community. What surprised Jack most, though, was how approachable Ethan seemed. Instead of brushing past him like many others might have done, Ethan struck up a conversation. They talked about the highway project, the changes happening in the region, and how it affected people like Jack. Ethan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine curiosity about Jack's experience. "You must have gone through a lot," Ethan said, leaning against the shopping cart. "Losing something so close to your heart isn't easy." Jack nodded quietly, unsure of what to say. He didn't expect anyone, let alone someone involved in development, to understand his pain, but Ethan didn't stop there. He shared stories of his own struggles when he first started in the business, how he faced resistance from communities, dealt with setbacks, and learned to navigate the complex world of real estate. By the end of their conversation, Jack found himself opening up more than he had in months. Before parting ways, Ethan gave Jack a small piece of advice that lingered in his mind long after they said goodbye. "Sometimes," Ethan said with a knowing smile, "things happen for reasons we can't see right away. Trust me, I've been there." The encounter stuck with Jack in unexpected ways. For days afterward, he kept replaying their conversation in his head. Was Ethan just being friendly? Or was there something deeper behind his words? Jack wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Ethan's sincerity stood out. In a world where everyone seemed focused on their own goals, Ethan had taken the time to connect with someone who had lost everything. A few weeks later, Jack received a surprising invitation. A neatly typed letter arrived in his mailbox inviting him to visit Ethan's office downtown. At first, Jack hesitated. Why would a successful developer want anything to do with him? Was this some kind of trick? After debating with himself for hours, curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to go. When Jack walked into Ethan's sleek modern office, he felt out of place. The polished floors, glass walls, and high-tech gadgets were a far cry from the simplicity of his old farmhouse. Yet Ethan greeted him warmly, making Jack feel less like a visitor and more like an old acquaintance. "Thanks for coming," Ethan said, gesturing toward a chair. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." As they sat down, Ethan explained his idea. He told Jack that he admired his perspective on rural communities and the challenges they faced due to urbanization. Many developers bulldoze through people's lives without considering the impact, but Ethan wanted to take a different approach. He believed that involving someone like Jack, a person who had lived through displacement, could make a real difference. "Want you to be my consultant," Ethan said firmly. "You've seen firsthand what happens when progress rolls over personal histories. I need your insight to find better solutions for everyone." Jack was taken aback. Him, a consultant, he wasn't sure he had anything valuable to offer. But Ethan persisted, explaining how Jack's knowledge could help negotiate fair deals for other landowners and ensure sustainable practices during construction. Slowly, Jack began to see the potential, not just for himself, but for others who might face the same fate he did. Though skeptical at first, Jack agreed to give it a try. Over time, he became deeply involved in Ethan's projects. Together, they worked on initiatives aimed at minimizing harm to rural areas and creating opportunities for displaced families. Jack traveled to different towns, met with farmers, and listened to their concerns. He helped draft agreements that prioritized fairness and transparency, earning the trust of those who initially doubted Ethan's intentions. Their partnership proved to be a game changer. Not only did it bring positive attention to Ethan's company, but it also restored some of Jack's faith in humanity. For the first time in years, he felt like he was making a difference. But despite the progress, Jack couldn't shake off the memories of his old farm. Every time he visited the area, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, nostalgia, and regret. Little did he know, another twist awaited him, one that would not only challenge his beliefs but also redefine his future in ways he never imagined. Jack had settled into his new role as a consultant, finding purpose in helping others navigate the same struggles he once faced. He worked closely with Ethan on projects across the region, traveling to small towns where farmers and landowners grappled with the threat of losing their homes to development. Jack listened to their stories that echoed his own pain, and offered advice based on his experiences. Together, they crafted solutions that balanced progress with respect for people's livelihoods. But no matter how fulfilling this work became, there was always a part of Jack that remained tethered to the past. Whenever he drove by the highway, cutting through his old farm, memories flooded back. He'd think about the mornings spent tending to crops, the laughter shared with his family under the open sky, and the quiet evenings watching the sunset over fields that now lay buried under asphalt. Those feelings never faded. They lingered like an ache in his chest. One rainy afternoon, Jack received an unexpected call from Ethan. "I need you to come to my office," Ethan said, his tone unusually serious. "There's something I want to show you." Curious but wary, Jack agreed. When he arrived at the sleek downtown office, Ethan greeted him with a folder in hand. Instead of offering pleasantries, Ethan got straight to the point. "Do you remember your old farm?" he asked, sliding the folder across the desk. Jack frowned, unsure where this was going. He opened the folder and began flipping through the documents inside. At first glance, it looked like legal jargon. Contracts, deeds, technical terms. But then something caught his eye. Certain clauses mentioned mineral rights tied to the property. According to the paperwork, these rights hadn't transferred fully when the government acquired the land. And beneath those acres, untapped natural gas reserves estimated to be worth millions. Jack stared at the pages, his mind racing. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying Jack's reaction. "It means," he said slowly, "that even though the surface of your land is gone, what lies underneath still holds value. A lot of value." Jack felt a mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, and maybe even a flicker of hope. But confusion quickly took over. "How did you know about this?" he asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Years ago, when the highway project was announced, I bought the mineral rights from the state. Back then, I didn't know if anything would come of it. It was just a gamble. But recent advancements in drilling technology have made extraction feasible. If we move forward, we're looking at significant profits." Jack's head spun. All these years, he'd thought the farm was completely lost. He'd mourned its destruction, accepted the compensation check, and tried to move on. Now, here was Ethan telling him that a piece of his legacy still existed, not above ground but below it. "But why are you telling me this now?" Jack asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "If the rights are yours, what's stopping you from moving ahead without me?" Ethan sighed, leaning forward with an earnest expression. "Because legally I can't proceed without your consent. The original deed includes clauses granting residual ownership to your family. You're still entitled to a share of whatever comes out of that land." Jack sat in silence, processing everything. Part of him wanted to walk away, to leave the past buried along with the farm. But another part, the part that missed the connection to his roots, felt drawn to the possibility of reclaiming something he thought was lost forever. "I didn't buy those rights out of greed," Ethan continued, sensing Jack's hesitation. "I did it because I believed in you. Because I knew someday this could give you a chance to rewrite your story." Jack left the office that day with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, he wrestled with the decision. On one hand, partnering with Ethan meant reopening old wounds he wasn't sure had fully healed. On the other hand, it offered an opportunity to turn tragedy into triumph, to honor his family's legacy in a way he hadn't thought possible. Finally, after much deliberation, Jack made up his mind. He called Ethan and agreed to collaborate. They formed a joint venture, combining Jack's knowledge of the land with Ethan's expertise in resource development. Their goal was clear: extract the natural gas responsibly, using eco-friendly methods, and reinvest the profits into community programs that supported rural families affected by urbanization. The project moved forward swiftly. Drilling began, and within months the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Gas flowed steadily, bringing in revenue far beyond what either man had anticipated. For Jack, the financial windfall was staggering. Every month he received royalty checks totaling $100,000, a figure that seemed almost surreal given his humble beginnings. But money wasn't the only thing Jack gained. With his newfound wealth, he set out to heal old wounds. He donated generously to local schools, funding scholarships for students interested in agriculture. He purchased adjacent lands, restoring parts of the habitat that had been destroyed during the highway construction. Where the farmhouse once stood, he planted trees and flowers, creating a memorial garden dedicated to his ancestors. For the first time in years, Jack felt a sense of peace. The farm may have been physically gone, but its spirit lived on, not just in the profits from the gas reserves, but in the positive impact he was making on his community. What had once been a source of anguish had transformed into an opportunity for growth, renewal, and redemption. As Jack reflected on the journey, he realized that sometimes life takes you down paths you never expected. Losing the farm had been devastating, but it had also opened doors he couldn't have imagined. Through resilience, trust, and a willingness to embrace change, he had turned loss into legacy, a legacy that honored his family's history while paving the way for a brighter future. Jack's life had taken a turn he never could have predicted. The monthly royalty checks, each for $100,000, were proof that the world worked in mysterious ways. Money wasn't something Jack had ever chased. It was always about the land, the soil, and the stories it held. But now, with this unexpected windfall, he found himself asking, "What should I do with it? How can I make this mean something more than just numbers on paper?" At first, Jack felt overwhelmed. He'd spent most of his life working hard to get by, never imagining he'd one day have more money than he knew what to do with. Sitting alone in his small city apartment, he stared at the check in his hand, wondering if it was all some kind of cosmic joke. Was fate mocking him, giving him riches after taking away the one thing he truly loved? Or was this an opportunity to rewrite his story, not just for himself, but for others who had faced similar losses? The answer came to him slowly, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. If the land beneath his old farm could still give back, then maybe he could too. Maybe he could use this second chance to heal not only his own wounds, but also those of the community he'd left behind. One of the first things Jack did was visit the local school near his old farm. It was a modest building, worn down by time and neglect, much like many rural schools across the region. Children sat in classrooms with peeling paint and outdated textbooks, their dreams as big as any kids, but their resources painfully limited. Jack remembered how education had been a lifeline for his own family. His parents had scraped together every penny to send him to a decent school, believing it would open doors for him. Now, he wanted to pay that forward. He donated a large portion of his earnings to upgrade the school's facilities. New computers arrived, along with science lab equipment and shelves stocked with books. For the first time in years, the teachers saw hope in the eyes of their students. Jack didn't stop there. He set up a scholarship fund specifically for kids from farming families, ensuring they wouldn't have to choose between staying on the land or pursuing higher education. "You don't have to leave your roots behind to chase your dreams," he told them during a ceremony at the school. "Sometimes you carry them with you." Word spread quickly about Jack's generosity. People who once viewed him as just another farmer displaced by progress began seeing him differently, as someone who understood their struggles and cared enough to help. Farmers started reaching out to him, sharing their own stories of loss and hardship. They asked for advice not just on dealing with developers but also on finding new ways to sustain themselves in a changing world. Jack listened patiently, offering guidance whenever he could. He became a voice for those who felt silenced, a bridge between the past and the future. But Jack didn't limit his efforts to people alone. He turned his attention back to the land itself, the very thing that had shaped his life. Though the farmhouse was gone and the fields were buried under concrete, Jack decided to reclaim what he could. Using part of his earnings, he purchased acres of nearby land that were either abandoned or neglected. These weren't prime farming plots. They were overgrown with weeds, eroded by poor management, or scarred by industrial activity. To Jack, however, they represented potential. With the help of environmental experts and volunteers from the community, Jack began restoring these lands, Trees were planted to combat soil erosion, native grasses were reintroduced to support wildlife, and wetlands were revitalized to improve water quality. Over time, the barren patches transformed into thriving ecosystems. Birds returned, deer wandered freely, and wildflowers painted the landscape in vibrant colors. Jack even installed plaques around the area, dedicating sections of the restored land to his ancestors. "This is for you," he whispered during one quiet afternoon standing among the trees. "I'm bringing it back, piece by piece." Despite all the good he was doing, Jack couldn't shake off the memories of his old farm. Every time he drove past the highway cutting through the fields, a lump formed in his throat. The sight of bulldozers and trucks hauling materials reminded him of everything he'd lost. Yet, even here, he found a way to make peace. Jack approached Ethan with an idea. "What if we create a memorial along the highway?" he suggested. "Something to honor the history of this place, the farms, the families, the lives that were changed forever." Ethan loved the idea and immediately agreed to help. Together, they designed a roadside park where travelers could stop and reflect. A stone monument stood at the center, engraved with words celebrating the resilience of rural communities. Benches surrounded it, inviting visitors to sit and take in the view. Nearby, informational panels told the story of the land, the crops that once grew there, the people who worked tirelessly to nurture it, and the sacrifices made for progress. When the memorial was unveiled, locals gathered to celebrate. Many brought photos, tools, and artifacts from their own farms, creating a makeshift museum of sorts. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with laughter, tears, and shared memories. For Jack, it felt like closure. He realized that while the physical farm was gone, its spirit lived on, in the stories, the connections, and the legacy he was building. As months passed, Jack noticed subtle changes in himself. The anger and bitterness he'd carried for so long began to fade. In their place grew gratitude for the lessons learned, the friendships forged, and the opportunities he'd been given to rebuild. He still missed the simplicity of his old life, but he no longer saw his journey as a tragedy. Instead, it was a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the power of second chances. Even Ethan noticed the shift. One evening, as they sat together, overlooking the highway, Ethan remarked, "You've come a long way since we first met." Jack chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess I have. Funny how losing everything taught me what really matters." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes life hands us detours we don't want, but they lead us somewhere better than we ever imagined." Jack didn't respond right away. He gazed at the horizon, watching the sun dip below the hills. The highway stretched endlessly before him, carrying people to destinations unknown. And yet, for the first time, he felt grounded, connected to both his past and his future. Little did he know this was only the beginning. There were still chapters waiting to be written, stories waiting to unfold. But for now, Jack allowed himself to breathe, to savor the moment. After all, he'd earned it. Years had passed since Jack first received that life-changing royalty check, and the transformation in his life, and the lives of those around him, was nothing short of remarkable. The monthly payments kept coming, steady and reliable, like clockwork. At first, the sheer amount of money felt surreal to Jack. He'd spent so much of his life working with his hands, living paycheck to paycheck, that having 6 figures arrive in his bank account every month seemed almost dreamlike. But as time went on, he grew more comfortable, not with the wealth itself, but with the responsibility it brought. Jack wasn't one to sit idle. Money, he believed, was a tool, a means to create something meaningful. And so he poured his energy into projects that not only honored his past, but also built a brighter future for others. His restored lands became a sanctuary, a place where nature thrived and people could reconnect with the simplicity of rural life. Families would visit on weekends, kids running through fields of wildflowers while parents marveled at how such beauty could rise from neglect. It was healing for them, and for Jack too. But perhaps what touched him most deeply were the letters he started receiving. They came from strangers all over the country, people who had heard about his story and wanted to share their own. Some wrote about losing farms to highways or factories. Others talked about battling developers who cared little for the communities they disrupted. Each letter carried its own weight of pain, frustration, and hope. And Jack read every single one, responding personally when he could. "You're not alone," he'd write back. "Things might look dark now, but there's always a way forward." One day, as Jack sat in his modest office, a small room filled with maps, photos, and notes from the community, he got a call from Ethan. Their partnership had grown stronger, over the years built on mutual respect and shared goals. Ethan's voice on the line sounded unusually excited. "Got a minute? I need to show you something." Curious, Jack agreed to meet him at the edge of the restored land. When he arrived, Ethan greeted him with a grin and handed him a thick folder. Inside were blueprints, sketches, and plans for something Jack hadn't expected: a sustainable agricultural hub. "This is our next step," Ethan explained, pointing to the designs. "We'll use part of your restored land to build a center where farmers can learn modern techniques, experiment with eco-friendly practices, and find new ways to make farming profitable again. Think of it as a bridge between tradition and innovation." Jack flipped through the pages, his heart swelling with pride. This was exactly the kind of project he'd dreamed of, a way to give back to the very people who inspired him daily. Together, they envisioned workshops on crop rotation, seminars on water conservation, and even programs teaching young farmers how to adapt to changing markets. The hub wouldn't just preserve the spirit of rural life, it would breathe new life into it. Construction began within months, and soon the once empty fields buzzed with activity. Volunteers poured in from neighboring towns, eager to lend a hand. Farmers donated old equipment, which was refurbished and repurposed for training sessions. Even local businesses pitched in, sponsoring events and offering discounts to participants. Watching it all unfold, Jack realized he wasn't just rebuilding land. He was rebuilding trust, connection, and hope. As the hub took shape, Jack found himself reflecting on his journey. He often drove out to the memorial park along the highway, sitting on one of the benches to watch the sunset. The monument stood tall, a silent witness to everything he'd lost and gained. Sometimes travelers would stop by, curious about the plaques and panels telling the story of the land. Jack didn't mind talking to them. In fact, he welcomed it. Sharing his story helped him process his own emotions, and hearing theirs reminded him why this work mattered. One evening, as he sat there alone, an older man approached him. His face was weathered, his hands rough from years of labor. He introduced himself as a retired farmer whose land had been taken decades ago for a similar highway project. "I read about what you're doing," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's given me hope. For years I thought my story ended when my farm did. But seeing what you've built, well, it makes me think maybe endings aren't always final." Jack nodded, understanding exactly what the man meant. "Loss isn't the end of the road," he replied softly. "It's just a turn we don't expect. Sometimes it leads us somewhere better than we imagined." The man smiled, thanked him, and walked away. Jack stayed seated, letting the words linger in the cool evening air. He thought about how far he'd come, from bitterness and despair to purpose and fulfillment. Losing the farm had shattered him, but it had also forced him to rebuild in ways he never anticipated. What emerged was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than before. Back in the city, Jack's contributions rippled outward. The scholarship fund he'd established was helping dozens of students pursue careers in agriculture, engineering, and environmental science. Many of them returned to their hometowns after graduation, armed with knowledge and passion to drive change. Local schools flourished under his support, and teachers spoke proudly of the impact his donations had made. Even the grocery store where he'd first met Ethan became a symbol of serendipity for Jack. Whenever he shopped there, he couldn't help but smile, thinking about how that chance encounter had changed everything. Yet despite all the good he'd done, Jack remained humble. He didn't seek recognition or applause. To him, this wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about legacy. Every tree planted, every student educated, every family helped was a testament to the values his parents and grandparents had instilled in him. hard work, compassion, and perseverance. One crisp autumn morning, Jack woke up early and headed to Way, the restored lands. The air smelled of fresh earth and fallen leaves, reminding him of the seasons he used to track on his old farm. As he walked among the rows of newly planted crops and budding trees, he felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't his farm anymore, not in the traditional sense, but it was still his vision, his effort, his love made tangible. He climbed a small hill overlooking the property, taking in the view. Fields stretched out beneath him, golden and green, interspersed with patches of forest and wildflowers. Birds chirped overhead, and the distant hum of machinery from the agricultural hub blended seamlessly with the sounds of nature. For a moment, Jack closed his eyes and let the scene sink in. When he opened them again, he noticed a group of children playing near the edge of the field. They laughed and chased each other, completely carefree. One of them spotted him and waved, enthusiastically. Jack waved back, a warmth spreading through his chest. These kids were the future, the ones who would inherit the world he was trying to protect and improve. And for the first time in years, he felt truly optimistic about what lay ahead. Jack knew his story wasn't finished yet. There were still challenges to face, lessons to learn, and bridges to build. But standing there, surrounded by the fruits of his labor, he felt ready for whatever came next. After all, he'd already proven that even the hardest losses could lead to unexpected gains. Life, he realized, was full of second chances. You just had to have the courage to take them. Years had passed since Jack first stood on the edge of his old farm, watching bulldozers tear through fields he'd nurtured for decades. Back then, the sight had filled him with anger and despair, a deep ache that felt like it would never heal. But now, as he sat on a weathered bench overlooking the highway cutting through what used to be his land, Jack felt something entirely different. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting or moving on, but the kind born out of understanding that sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the landscape. Cars zoomed by, their headlights flickering in the fading light. To most people driving past, this stretch of road was nothing more than asphalt and guardrails, an ordinary highway connecting one place to another. But to Jack, it was so much more. It was a reminder of loss, yes, but also of resilience, growth, and the unexpected ways life can surprise you. Beside him sat Ethan, the man who had once been a stranger but now felt like family. Over the years, their partnership had grown into a friendship rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Together, they'd turned tragedy into triumph, not just for Jack, but for countless others whose lives had been touched by their work. As they sat there quietly, Ethan broke the silence. "You know," Ethan said, leaning back and gazing at the horizon, "when I first met you, I didn't think we'd end up here." Jack chuckled softly. "Neither did I. If someone had told me back then that I'd be sitting here talking about second chances and legacies, I probably would have laughed." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "It's funny how things work out. You lost your farm and look at everything you've built since. Sometimes I wonder if you'd have done all this without that initial loss." Jack paused, considering the question. He'd asked himself the same thing many times. Would he have ever stepped outside his comfort zone if the farm hadn't been taken? Would he have reached out to help others if he hadn't experienced the pain of displacement firsthand? The truth was, he couldn't say for sure. What he did know was that losing the farm had forced him to confront parts of himself he might otherwise have ignored. It had pushed him to grow, not just as a person, but as someone capable of making a difference. "I don't think I'd trade it, Jackie," admitted finally. "Not for anything. Losing the farm hurt more than I can put into words, but it taught me things I wouldn't have learned any other way. About strength, patience, gratitude, even forgiveness." Ethan smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. "That's the thing about life. It doesn't always give us what we want, but it gives us what we need, even when we can't see it right away." As night fell, Jack and Ethan made their way back to the restored lands. The agricultural hub, glowed softly in the distance, its lights illuminating rows of crops and clusters of trees. Inside, farmers gathered for an evening workshop, sharing tips on sustainable practices and swapping stories about their day. Outside, children played, tag under the stars, their laughter echoing across the fields. It was a scene straight out of Jack's dreams, a blend of tradition and innovation, community and progress. Walking among the greenery, Jack stopped to touch the bark of a young oak tree he'd planted himself. Its leaves rustled gently in the mow breeze as if acknowledging his presence. He remembered the day he'd dug the hole for its roots, hands caked with dirt, sweat trickling down his face. At the time, planting the tree had felt symbolic, a gesture of hope, a promise to nurture something new. Now, standing beside it, Jack realized how much both he and the tree had grown. Nearby, a group of volunteers worked together to install solar panels on the roof of a small building. They joked and teased each other, their camaraderie evident despite the hard work. Jack watched them for a moment, feeling a swell of pride. These were the faces of change, young and old, men and women, united by a common goal. Each of them carried a piece of the legacy Jack had started, whether they realized it or not. Later that evening, Jack found himself back at the memorial park along the highway. The stone monument stood tall against the darkening sky, lit by soft spotlights that cast gentle shadows across its surface. He ran his fingers over the engraved words, tracing the letters as if trying to memorize them. The inscription read, "To those who tilled the soil, tended the land, and shaped the future with their hands, your sacrifices will never be forgotten." He lingered there for a while, letting the weight of those words settle over him. This place was more than just a tribute. It was a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder that even in loss, there is meaning. People still visited the park regularly, leaving flowers, notes, or small tokens of remembrance. Some came to reflect, others to find solace. All left carrying a piece of the story with them. As Jack prepared to leave, he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked into the base of the monument. Curious, he picked it up and unfolded it carefully. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "Thank you for showing us that loss isn't the end. My family lost our farm last year, and reading about what you've done has given me hope. We're going to plant a garden where our fields used to be. Maybe it won't bring back what we lost, but it'll remind us that life keeps growing." Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't know who had written the note, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the message behind it, the ripple effect of kindness, courage, and perseverance. His journey had started with pain, but it had grown into something far greater than he'd imagined. And now, it was inspiring others to take their own steps forward. Back home, as Jack settled into his chair for the night, he reflected on everything that had happened. The monthly royalty checks continued to arrive, steady and reliable, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they represented possibility, a chance to create, to give back, to honor the past while shaping the future. Money wasn't the measure of success. Impact was. He thought about the students graduating from college thanks to the scholarships he'd funded, the families finding new opportunities through the agricultural hub, and the land slowly healing itself under careful stewardship. Each of these moments was a thread woven into the tapestry of his legacy, a legacy built not on wealth but on connection, compassion, and purpose. Before turning off the light, Jack opened a journal he kept on his bedside table. On the first page, he wrote 3 simple words: "Keep growing." It wasn't advice for anyone else, it was a promise to himself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he vowed to keep learning, keep giving, and keep believing in the power of second chances. As sleep claimed him, Jack dreamed of fields stretching endlessly toward the horizon, golden with promise. Somewhere, in the distance, he heard the sound of laughter, his own, mingling with voices of those who had joined him on this journey. For the first time in years, he slept soundly, knowing that his story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who dared to believe that even after loss, life could bloom again.